Jordan Henderson spent the entire match on the bench. Hours later, he was heading to the hospital with a broken wrist. Even Thomas Tuchel couldn't believe how it happened. And once the full story emerged, it sounded almost impossible. Let me break it down. The scoreline read 3-2. England had just knocked out one of the co-hosts on their own turf in front of a crowd that had been loud from the first whistle. Henderson's injury came on a night that will live long in the memory for everyone at the Azteca. Mexico had lost just 2 of their previous 89 competitive matches at that stadium. This was supposed to be England's moment, and for most of the squad it still was. But Henderson never touched the ball that night. He was an unused substitute, picking up a booking on the sidelines toward the end of the match, having played only 6 minutes across the entire tournament. Coming on late in the group stage win over Panama, he didn't play a single minute against Mexico. He received a yellow card in stoppage time after arguing with the referee and interfering with an England throw-in from the sideline. Then the final whistle went, and that's when it happened. Instead of getting hurt during play, Henderson was injured moments after the final whistle while celebrating England's victory, tripping over advertising hoardings near the touchline, landing awkwardly and trapping his arm beneath his body. He seriously injured his wrist jumping over an advertising board during the celebrations, taking the fall following England's sing-along with fans to Oasis Wonderwall. Some reports say it was his right wrist, others say his left. Dan Burn quickly alerted medical staff to the injury, having seen Henderson grabbing at his wrist. But either way, the celebration turned into an emergency in seconds. It escalated fast. Henderson was seen lying on the ground in considerable discomfort, with Dan Burn promptly summoning medical assistance, before England's squad formed a protective screen around him, as he was carried off the pitch on a stretcher and given oxygen. Think about that for a second. A player who hadn't kicked a ball all night, being stretchered off with oxygen, surrounded by his own teammates trying to shield him from the cameras. Tuchel was doing his post-match media duties when word came through, and you could hear it change his tone completely. Speaking to the BBC, the England manager admitted things weren't good. Jordan had just fallen over and injured his wrist, and it looked really bad. That's not the language of a manager brushing off a minor knock. That's a manager who's just found out one of his most experienced players might be done for the tournament, over nothing that happened on the pitch. He kept going. Tuchel said Henderson had injured his wrist and gone to hospital, calling it quite a serious injury, adding that it didn't fit with the night, and that he didn't know if there would be a procedure. That phrase, "it doesn't fit with the night," he said some version of it almost every time he was asked, because it genuinely didn't. England had just won, and the headline afterward was a guy in a hospital bed who'd spent the match on the bench. Other players in the squad were asked about it too. Harry Kane, the captain, was pulled aside during the broadcast interview and gave a version that made it sound almost innocent at first. Kane said Hendo had just fallen over there, that he thought he was okay, and that it was just something to do with his arm. Except Henderson wasn't okay. Kane just didn't know the full extent yet. Nobody did. Then there was Jude Bellingham, who'd scored twice that night to help drag England over the line. Even in the middle of celebrating one of the biggest nights of his own career, he was fielding questions about his teammate on the sideline instead. Bellingham said the medical team had everything under control, but that it was best not to give too much detail when he didn't know everything himself. That's the tone from the whole camp in the hours after. Cautious, worried, and clearly caught off guard. By the time the dust settled, the picture was clear. Henderson didn't play in the game, but he got hurt afterward. It's one of those lines that sounds almost like a joke, until you realize how serious the actual injury turned out to be. A guy warms up, sits on the bench for 90+ minutes, doesn't get a single touch, and still ends up in a Mexico City hospital by full time. Henderson was taken to a hospital in Mexico City, putting his participation in the rest of the tournament at risk, and it was later confirmed he wouldn't return to Kansas City with the rest of the squad that evening as he continued to receive treatment. While the rest of the team flew back to their base to prepare for the next round, Henderson stayed behind. He remained in Mexico City with an England staff member, while the rest of the squad flew back to the team's training base in Kansas City, Missouri. That split the team celebrating and moving forward. Henderson stuck behind in a hospital room is the image that stuck with people since. It's also exactly why this whole thing has generated the reaction it has. Not because a player got hurt. Players get hurt all the time. It's the how a guy who never played hurt himself worse than most of the players who did. And Tuchel, by his own account, still didn't fully understand it either. He wasn't hiding that confusion. He was leading with it every time a microphone got put in front of him, to understand why this particular injury landed the way it did. you have to understand who Henderson is inside that England squad, and what path actually brought him to Mexico City in the first place. Jordan Brian Henderson, born June 17, 1990, is an English midfielder who plays for Brentford and the England national team, known for his leadership, versatility, and physicality, having joined the Sunderland Academy at age 8 and made his first team debut a decade later. That's more than a quarter of a century in professional football. By the time he stepped foot in Mexico, the Liverpool chapter is the one most people know. He signed for Liverpool in 2011, winning his first trophy a year later, was appointed captain in 2015, then won the Champions League, the UEFA Super Cup, and the FIFA Club World Cup in 2019, led the club to the Premier League title in 2020, and was named FWA Footballer of the Year that same season, before adding the FA Cup and EFL Cup in 2022. That's about as complete a trophy haul as any English midfielder has put together in the modern era. He wasn't the flashiest player in that Liverpool team. He was the one holding it together. He was also more than a footballer to a lot of people in that period. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Henderson, as Liverpool captain, contacted fellow Premier League captains to organize a fund that would raise millions of pounds for the NHS, with the idea that footballers would contribute to support frontline workers. That effort got him recognized well beyond football. He was appointed a member of the Order of the British Empire for services to football and to charity, particularly during the pandemic. Then came the move that complicated all of that goodwill. In the summer of 2023, he signed for Saudi Pro League club Al Ettifaq, managed by his former Liverpool teammate Steven Gerrard. The backlash was immediate, and it wasn't really about the football. He was criticized for the move, having previously written in support of the LGBTQ+ community, with the club even releasing footage that had desaturated his rainbow armband to black and white. Former players in the game called him out directly for it. Thomas Hitzlsperger, who came out publicly after his own playing career, posted that he'd struggled to believe Henderson's support had been genuine. Henderson didn't stay long. He left Al Ettifaq in January 2024 after his contract was mutually terminated, signing the same day for Eredivisie club Ajax on a 2.5-year deal. He was honest afterward about how hard that stretch had been on him personally. He compared leaving Liverpool to a breakup, and said he'd endured tough moments since making the move to Saudi Arabia, where he'd faced criticism over playing in a country where same-sex relationships are illegal, and he apologized for letting down anyone in the LGBTQ+ community. After eventually leaving to join Ajax, Ajax gave him some of his career back on the pitch, but it also cost him with England. The move damaged his reputation and arguably played a part in him missing out on Gareth Southgate's Euro 2024 squad. Henderson has pushed back on that connection directly, saying he didn't think the Saudi stint was the actual reason, and that in hindsight he might have made different decisions on timing, but that he'd made the choices he thought were right at the time. After roughly 18 months in Amsterdam, he wanted back into the Premier League. He said he missed the Premier League. The intensity, the atmospheres, the whole feeling of it, and that missing it is ultimately what brought him back. Brentford completed his signing after he departed Ajax, marking his return to England after leaving Liverpool in 2023, having won the Premier League and Champions League as Reds captain. Brentford's head coach was blunt about why they wanted him. Keith Andrews said it was a pretty simple decision. Once they became aware of Jordan's availability, having done their homework and found he was still phenomenally fit and phenomenally motivated, and that his experience was important, given the club had just lost the likes of Christian Norgard, Mark Flecken, and Ben Mee. That's the version of Henderson who walked into the England camp. For this World Cup, not a guaranteed starter, not even close to the player he was during Liverpool's title run, but someone brought back in specifically for what he could offer off the pitch, as much as on it. After being overlooked for Southgate's Euro 2024 squad, Henderson was brought back into the England fold under Tuchel, who appreciates both his on-field experience and off-field leadership credentials. And that's exactly why this injury lands differently than a typical muscle strain or hamstring pull. This wasn't a guy who'd been logging 90 minutes every match, and finally broke down under the workload. The loss of Henderson strips England of a leader in the dressing room, who recently earned his 90th international cap, even though his on-field minutes had been limited this summer, with his only appearance coming as a late substitute against Panama. His value to this England squad was never really about output on the scoresheet. It was about what he brought to the group, when the cameras weren't rolling, and that's precisely the role that got interrupted by a freak accident that had nothing to do with football at all. So how exactly does a guy who never left the bench end up needing surgery? The details, once they came out, painted a pretty vivid picture of just how quickly a celebration can turn into a medical emergency. Henderson's World Cup seemed to come to an early end, after reportedly breaking his arm, according to reports that began circulating within hours of the final whistle. The initial word out of the stadium was vague. Wrist arm, nobody was quite sure which or how bad. What was clear from very early on was the mechanism. This wasn't a tackle, a collision, or anything resembling a football injury. The Brentford midfielder suffered his injury while attempting to join his teammates in front of the traveling supporters, with reports indicating he fell over an advertising board as he climbed toward the fans shortly after the final whistle. Once he went down, the response from the medical staff was immediate and visibly serious. The situation escalated quickly as medical staff rushed to the scene, and in worrying scenes for the England camp, Henderson was seen receiving oxygen before being carried off the pitch on a stretcher, then transported to a hospital in Mexico City for evaluation, while the rest of the squad returned to their base in Kansas City. Oxygen isn't standard procedure for a routine wrist sprain. It's the kind of precaution medical teams take when someone's in serious pain or shock, and it tells you how alarming the scene looked in the moment. Tuchel gave several separate interviews that night, and the details shifted slightly, each time depending on who was asking, but the tone stayed remarkably consistent. Cautious, a little stunned, clearly still processing it himself. He told ITV it wasn't good, that Jordan had fallen over and injured his wrist, and that it looked really bad. To another outlet, he gave a version that leaned more into his own emotional reaction than the medical one. Responding when questioned about the injury, Tuchel said he was sad because Jordan had injured his wrist, that it was quite serious, and that he was in hospital. What's notable is how many times he circled back to that same phrase, that none of this fit with what should have been one of the best nights of the tournament. He kept saying it didn't fit with the rest of the evening, and that he didn't know the procedure going forward. You can hear a manager who just watched his team pull off a knockout win in incredibly difficult conditions, only to have the entire mood in the dressing room shift. The second word came through about Henderson. The full picture only really came into focus the next day. Once scans had been done, it emerged that Henderson was set to miss the rest of England's World Cup. After being informed he needed an operation on an unusual wrist injury, having fallen awkwardly while clambering over an advertising hoarding during the celebrations. The Athletic reported that the Brentford player requires an operation to repair the damage, with one member of England's medical team remaining behind in Mexico City to support him. That confirmation changed the story from scary scene, hopefully fine, to tournament over. England's Jordan Henderson has been ruled out for the remainder of England's World Cup campaign. After the freak injury against Mexico, Tuchel had to address it again once the surgery news was official. And this time there was less uncertainty in what he said, even if the sadness hadn't gone anywhere. The German coach confirmed the 36-year-old former Liverpool captain wouldn't be available for the upcoming quarterfinal clash against Norway, telling reporters he was sad because Jordan had injured his wrist. What makes the whole sequence stand out isn't really the medical severity on its own. Footballers get wrist fractures, ankle breaks, and worse, fairly regularly across a long career. It's the total mismatch between cause and effect. Henderson's injury became the latest twist in a World Cup campaign defined by drama both on and off the pitch, with his only contribution on the field remaining a short cameo in the group stages. A frustrating end for a player who has served his country for over a decade. 90+ minutes on the bench, 6 minutes of actual football across an entire tournament, and it still ended with an operation. That's the part that had people across the football world doing a double take. Once the surgery news was confirmed, the story stopped being just about Henderson and started being about what it meant for the rest of England's World Cup run. Because Tuchel wasn't just dealing with one absence, he was suddenly staring down a squad depleted on two fronts from the exact same match. Tuchel also faced another selection problem after defender Gerald Quansah was sent off against Mexico, leaving England short of defensive options ahead of the quarterfinal. Quansah had seen red for a dangerous tackle after a VAR review, before Kane restored England's 2-goal advantage with a penalty 5 minutes later. So in the space of one match against Mexico, England won going away, but also lost a defender to suspension and a senior midfielder to surgery, both before the more difficult rounds of the tournament had even started. Tuchel didn't hide his frustration about the officiating either, and it added another layer to what was already an emotionally charged post-match. He bemoaned the red card decision, implying the choice of 3 South American officials at VAR might have affected their judgment. saying flatly that referees weren't good enough, that fourth officials weren't good enough. And that was the bottom line. He went further, questioning whether the review had even met the threshold required to overturn the call. He pointed out that 3 people at the VAR were from South America in a match like this, questioning whether it was really a clear and obvious error, and noting that the officials hadn't even given the initial foul before overturning the yellow to red, repeating that neither the referee nor the fourth official had been good enough. That combination, a suspended defender, a hospitalized veteran midfielder, and a manager publicly frustrated with the officials, meant the celebration after one of England's best wins of the tournament barely lasted the night. As England prepared to face Norway, they had to navigate the tournament's final stages without one of their most seasoned professionals, with Quansah also facing suspension. Adding to a growing headache regarding squad depth, Bellingham, for his part, tried to strike a more measured tone publicly, even while acknowledging the situation was serious. He said Henderson was in a bit of bother, but that the medical team had everything under control, adding he wasn't in a position to give too much detail since he didn't know everything going on, but that everyone had been there to support him. Bellingham applied roughly the same restraint to the officiating controversy, choosing not to pile on. He was more diplomatic, seeming to agree England had been hard done by while pointing out it ultimately hadn't cost his side, saying that in terms of the refereeing decisions, it was what it was, as easy as it was to say afterward. Despite all of it, Tuchel tried to keep the focus on the achievement itself, because by any measure it had been an enormous result. He said in the build-up it never felt like a round of 16, and it still didn't feel like one. It felt almost like they'd won a final, given they'd overcome 40 to 50 minutes with 10 men, at altitude against a strong Mexican team in front of their own crowd, calling it a heroic performance and a heroic result. But that heroic framing existed alongside a squad now missing 2 key figures. Heading into a quarterfinal against Norway, the result set up a meeting with Norway, as Tuchel's side continued its pursuit of World Cup glory. Though whether Henderson would be available for that challenge remained uncertain from the moment the injury happened. By the time confirmation came through that surgery was required, that uncertainty had already resolved itself into an answer nobody in the camp wanted. Although Henderson had not been a regular starter throughout the tournament, his experience and influence inside the dressing room had made him an important figure within England's squad, particularly during the knockout stages. That's really the crux of why Tuchel felt this loss so heavily. It was never really about minutes on the pitch. It was about who Henderson was to the group. When things got tense, which is exactly the kind of scenario a quarterfinal against Norway was about to become. By the time England's squad reconvened in Kansas City to prepare for Norway, the shape of the story had settled. Henderson wasn't coming back for this tournament. His night ended not with a tackle or a sprint or a challenge, but with an advertising board and a moment of pure celebration gone wrong. There's something almost unbearably human about how it played out. Henderson didn't play that Sunday. His only involvement had been a yellow card in stoppage time, after arguing with the referee and interfering with an England throw-in from the sideline. That's the entirety of his footballing contribution to the biggest win of England's tournament so far. And yet he's the one who left in an ambulance. Henderson has spent more than 2 decades building the kind of career that gets him remembered as a leader rather than a highlight reel. Across 492 appearances in all competitions for Liverpool, where he became club captain in 2015 and helped them lift 7 major honors, including the Champions League and Premier League title, Liverpool's first top-flight success in 30 years. None of that history made this particular injury any less strange, or any less painful for him to go through in a hospital bed far from the rest of the squad. What happens next for him is still unclear. Reports at the time only confirmed that surgery was necessary, not the full recovery timeline, which means his return date, whether that's for Brentford's next Premier League campaign or a future England camp, is still up in the air. What is clear is that this was never going to be remembered as just a footnote. Losing a player of Henderson's stature, for reasons that had nothing to do with the game itself, is the kind of story that sticks around. Meanwhile, England moved on to face Norway with a squad short a defender through suspension, and short a senior midfielder through a freak accident nobody could have scripted. Tuchel still had a tournament to run, a quarterfinal to prepare for, and a group of players who just watched one of their most experienced teammates get carried off, on a night that was supposed to be nothing but celebration. For Henderson, the wait now is about the wrist itself, the surgery, the recovery, whatever comes after. For Tuchel, it's about steering the rest of this run without one of the voices he leaned on most. And for everyone else watching, it's the odd, almost unbelievable fact sitting at the center of the whole thing. A player can go an entire World Cup match without touching the ball and still walk away with the worst injury of the night. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content. Sources: TNT Sports, Tuchel update on Henderson injury. ESPN UK, Henderson out of World Cup with suspected broken arm. ESPN UK, Henderson hospitalized with wrist injury. IB Times UK, Tuchel addresses Henderson's fitness. ITV News, Henderson suffers serious wrist injury. Sky Sports, Henderson out of tournament after freak injury. Yahoo Sports, Henderson suffers freak injury. Yahoo Sports, how Henderson got nasty injury. ESPN, Henderson hospitalized with wrist injury during celebration. Yorkshire Live, Henderson ruled out of World Cup. Goalcom, Henderson to miss rest of World Cup, needs surgery. Yahoo Sports, Henderson to undergo wrist surgery. Wikipedia, Jordan Henderson. Brentford FC, signing of Jordan Henderson. Premier League, Henderson returns with Brentford. ESPN, Henderson on tough moments after Liverpool exit. Liverpool.com, Henderson explains Premier League return. Brentford FC, Henderson interview on Liverpool, Brentford, England. Liverpool.com, story behind Henderson's